Good morning and welcome back to the Tech23 Impact Circles. And for those new to the circles, a warm welcome to you. Thank you all for joining today's conversation on a crucial topic, decarbonising our entire economy, especially heavy industry. As is custom, I would first like to acknowledge both the Gadigal people of the Aurora Nation and the Bunwurrung and Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nation, the traditional custodians of the land where the Slattery's team meets, works and creates. We pay our respects to the elders both past and present. We're also aware others are joining from other traditional lands today, so please say hi in the chat and let us know where you're joining from. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Today's conversation will be kindly led by Cass Mao, and she's joined by Dr. Charles Day, Dr. Louise Keyte, Keyte McKenzie, Dr. Chun, Brigid OBrien, Dr. Tim Parsons, and Sophia Hamblin Wang, who will be joining us a little bit later as she's currently tied up on ABC Radio discussing the exciting New South Wales government emissions announcement. And you'll hear a lot about that, or a little bit about that later. Now, I'd like to make a special shout out to the Tech23 sponsors, Transport for New South Wales, Main Sequence Cyro Innovation Fund, Oz Industry Entrepreneurs Program delivered in partnership with I4 Connect, Addison's, ASX, Ansto, Curtin University, Cicada Innovations, and Evoke AG for making Tech23 happen. Our thanks to you. Now, good morning, Rachel.
Oh, hello, Adina, and hello, everyone. It's a great morning, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all. I especially want to call out our contributors today for joining us. As Adina said, please say hello and introduce yourselves in the chat, and you're also welcome to ask any questions there as well. We will be sharing lots of links, many sent to you in your event reminder, to help us all get our heads around this massive topic. And we encourage you to share what you know in the chat too. The link to the Slattery's Charter is found in the chat, which is a guide to the behaviour we encourage at all of our events. For those of you new to Tech23, a very special welcome. Tech23 is now in its 13th year, and we take pride in celebrating Australian innovation and is all about amplifying the people and organisations chipping away at the big challenges we face. There are lots more Tech23 circles planned for the rest of this year, and there's so many recordings of past circles from this year and last year. So please avail yourself of those at your leisure. Please note that today's circle is going to be recorded. I just want to thank you once again for zooming in, just confirming that we are going to eavesdrop on this conversation and then move to question and answer time in small groups where you're welcome to come on mute and connect with other people on the circle. It gives me great pleasure to welcome back Cass, who's taken on this massive role on a massive topic. We're honoured to have you back again, Cass. Welcome, and let's kick things off.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Rach and team. Super happy to be here again. I am looking forward to learning from our incredibly broad range of panelists. So the way I'll kick off today, I kind of tossed up whether or not we'll have the kind of speakers introduce themselves, because we do have such a broad range of panelists working in such kind of deep areas of expertise. I will actually do a quick round of intros, and then we'll kind of jump into questions from there. As Adina mentioned, Sophie's running late, but I'm hoping she will join at some point. And then roughly, just because we have 6 panelists in general, I will direct questions to specific panelists, but obviously super keen for everyone to jump in when things kind of make sense for their background. So shall we? Just to kick off, I'll go through each of the panelists and just have you do a very please short introduction, and just kind of share to the audience just to kind of contextualize the breadth of expertise that we do have on the panel today. What's the kind of area of heavy industry that you look at decarbonising and how, and maybe just if you can share the kind of what's the percentage contribution that has in the kind of global scheme of emissions. No pressure. So maybe I'll start with Charlie.
Great, thanks, Cass. So I'm Charlie Day. I'm the CEO of a new small spin-out company from Monash University called Jupiter Ionics. We're commercialising some technology from the chemistry school there, which uses an electrochemical approach to manufacture green ammonia. To give you a sense, green ammonia, ammonia production accounts for about 1.8 to 2% of global CO2 emissions today, mostly because it's made from natural gas. and it sits somewhere behind, I think, cement and steel are the bigger ones on the ranking, but we're third or fourth depending on how you look at decarbonisation priorities. But it's an essential chemical because 80% of ammonia is used to make fertiliser, and without fertiliser we would starve.
Perfect. Perfect introduction. Thank you. Let's go to Keyte.
Hi all, Keyte McKenzie. I am Principal Project Developer for Climate-KIC Australia. We co-convene the Australian Industry Energy Transitions Initiative, a total mouthful, which is quite fitting because it's a huge amount of work. We are helping some of Australia's biggest emitters get onto net zero emissions pathways, and I'm particularly focusing on what are the demonstration projects that we need to do to help them get there.
Awesome.
Our partners make up around about 12.3%, will contribute to around about 12.3% of Australia's GDP, and are a really, really significant part of Australia's emissions, but also their sort of scope 3 emissions are significant globally as well.
Yep, great. Awesome. Louise?
Hi everyone. I work for a company called Boral, which is a cement and concrete emplacing manufacturing company. I look after innovation in Australia for Boral, and I'm also the director of the UTS Boral Centre for Sustainable Building, which is a partnership between Boral and UTS to accelerate sustainable product development, which is very cool. I'm not sure how many people on the call are aware of the emissions from construction related activities, but depending on who you talk to, it's typically reported to be around 8 to 10% of global emissions. It's also the least disrupted industry, or second least. It's on track to be the least. I think it's technically the second least disrupted industry in the world. So the industry is facing a really big challenge over the coming years to address decarbonisation in a world where humans are addicted to concrete, as I like to say. So concrete's the second most consumed material in the world after water. And it's not a matter of simply saying, well, let's not use it anymore, replace it with something else. There aren't actually any other materials in sufficient quantities to replace cement or building materials. So decarbonisation is key. And that's the focus of the work that I do.
Awesome, thank you. Tim.
Hi, so I am coming to you from the space industry, where we're really interested in the power of Earth observation and also ground calibration and validation, things that Australia is extremely good at in baselining how much carbon dioxide and how much methane is being emitted today and how much we could sequester. Last couple of years, I've done about 40, 50 workshops in natural capital, and I'm delighted to have my mentor in this whole piece today, Mara Burnser, here in the audience. I've certainly discovered that agriculture and land clearing and land use, and in fact the entire food chain, contributes around 30% of our emissions globally. And so we see this opportunity and also a great willingness and interest in using market mechanisms to start to reward farmers, reward people who are managing biosystems and natural capital to increase the rate at which they're absorbing carbon dioxide, and actually turn the agricultural and food systems from being a net emitter to a net reducer of the total carbon load that we're pushing. So that's a bit about me, Cass.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you, Tim. Lucky last, Chun.
Hi everyone, yes, I'm Chun, from one of the senior researchers from Beyond Zero Emissions. I think our tagline is that we're an independent, solutions-focused think tank, but pretty much we just try to think of like positive ways in which we can address climate change while like providing a lot of benefits, whether it's economic or societal, to Australia. And yeah, our recent focus has been on renewable energy industrial precincts, which ties in heavily to how to decarbonize industry, using a collaborative approach, focusing on sort of like current industrial heartlands. Just, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
No, so good. Thank you everyone for keeping it short. You can see I'm like anxious, too many introductions. So the question I wanted to kick off with is you know, there's kind of this common refrain across climate.
Ooh, sorry, Kaz, yes, I'm going to interrupt. Brigid is here, I think.
Brigid, where are you?
Oh, I'm here. Hi.
Oh, I can't see you on my screen. Oh, there you. Hey, hello. How you going?
Hi. How are you?
Welcome.
Hi. So I'm Brigid OBrien. I am part of BHP Ventures. So we're the corporate venture capital arm of BHP. We invest in emerging and disruptive technologies that can help us with our decarbonization efforts, everything from scope 1, 2, and 3, along with innovative extraction, focusing on future-facing commodities, things that are mineral intensive for the energy transition. So that's my role at BHP.
Thanks. Great. So the kind of question I wanted to kick off with was there's this, as I was saying, there's kind of this common refrain across climate that we have most of the technology that we need to do the large majority of the kind of getting below net zero by 2050, and that kind of the challenge is much more in scaling those technologies, not developing new ones. And then even within kind of what we're talking about today in decarbonising heavy industry, I'd be curious how much that same effect exists already, that much of what we need to decarbonise heavy industry kind of already exists, but has kind of needs to go on the scale journey. I might kind of throw to kind of Keyte or Chun or Louise to kind of touch on that topic, like how much of what we already have how much of what we need do we already have, and then what are the kind of challenges in rolling those things out?
I might jump in quickly. I think there's a significant amount of technology out there, and in terms of even just the last couple of years, it's just grown exponentially, which is amazing. I think though, for those technologies to be successful in terms of really tackling these issues, is they need to be proven at scale. So it's getting them to be successful at scale that's really the issue. And so what we're seeing is more and more demonstration projects around the place, but things like getting down the cost of electricity, thinking about how organizations can better collaborate to more efficiently use the resources around them. There's a lot of things that still need to be done to make it all work together. Jordan, did you want to jump in?
Go, Chun.
Oops, sorry. Sorry.
You're right.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I think like the scaling is one of the biggest barriers right now. A lot of the early, like the concepts of the technologies is there, like whether it's hydrogen or like green steel, and even like stuff, and things like green aluminium is already like very electrified and can go renewables. So part of the thing is getting down the cost curve, making sure that when you scale it, it is still like profitable, because a lot of times the business case does matter, but also like just getting the infrastructure and the skills in place as well, because it's not like once you have the technology you can just run. You need the renewable energy to power all of these things, but to do that you need the transmission, and then for that you also need like storage capacity in order to make sure the industry can run on these things reliably. And so a lot of these places have to like come together much earlier, or at the same time. You can't just wait until, oh, the electrolyzer is cheap now we invest in renewables, now we invest in pipelines, now we do this. It's like, no, you really have to go all at once. And so yeah, that's what a lot of our messages, collaborate together. A lot of these people are talking about chicken and egg, supply demand. People can bank it, but there's no offtake, and people who want to use it don't have supply. And it's like, what do we do? It's like, work together. There's a lot of great synergies that can happen from some of these collaborations.
Yeah. Maybe Charlie, do you want to share a little bit on the journey you guys are going on and scaling up, and kind of trying to tap into infrastructure for something that ammonia is definitely already kind of in existence, but the process to kind of manufacture it in a sustainable way is definitely new?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the way I think about this is that we certainly have enough technologies to get started and make a start on some of the easy to decarbonize things, because some of the technologies that are early stage, like our technology works like in a test tube sort of scale reactor, and your typical ammonia plant today makes millions of tons of ammonia a year. So we've got a very long scale up journey. So even if all of the technical things go right, it's going to take us many years before we are at scale. We know that, but I mean, as the points have been made earlier, we do have enough technologies in the toolkit to make a start, to get started on a lot of these things. And the nature of the decarbonisation challenge is that we're trying to reduce the area under the curve effectively. So the sooner we can bring the emissions down, the better the runway we have.
I'd be super curious, maybe from Brigid and Louise, like the kind of perspective, both the role and the perspective of large corporates in kind of looking to decarbonize our own supply chains. How are you guys kind of seeing, like having the bird's eye view and kind of the coordination problems that Chun was speaking about, and the scale up challenges that Charlie's speaking about? How do you kind of see corporates that sit in the middle of that?
So from my perspective, I think the issue and it's the issue with any type of massive transformational change is feasibility, viability, and desirability. And so when you talk about, do we have the technology, sort of fits into that feasibility bucket. Yes, there are a lot of technologies out there that can do the job. And desirability, I think, in the construction industry is where we have more challenges potentially than in other industries is, you sort of, when you talk about desirability, total addressable market, serviceable attainable market, it's the entire market, but those people are used to a certain cost base, they're used to a certain performance, they've invested in huge amounts of capital to deal with the existing product. So when you look at modifying that product to make it lower carbon, it potentially may cost more, or it's less compatible with the equipment that they already have, or it requires different standards or cycle times. And then desirability goes from the high level statement of we'd like low carbon to, oh, but we don't want any headaches and we don't want to pay for it. So that's a real challenge for the construction industry. A very, the analogy I always use is if someone, invents a new phone and someone buys it and it breaks, it's really disappointing. You might get on Reddit and complain. If someone invents a new concrete and the building breaks, building falls down, people die, so the conservatism exists for a reason, because the risk profile is just so much higher. So that desirability part is where I think the challenge is. And then couple that with viability, which is, can a company continue to still be sustainable if it's having to spend so much more money on decarbonisation? And is it a chicken and the egg? For Boral, the company I work for, to lead in this space, there's no point in doing that if it costs more money than we make, because the company will go out of business, and then the whole thing is whole thing's moot. So I think the feasibility, absolutely, particularly in construction, there are multiple technologies that are proven, that you could press go on tomorrow, but aren't necessarily products that our customers want. And don't necessarily meet that risk profile that people make people feel comfortable to build an 80-story building, and also aren't necessarily compatible with millions of dollars of capital. So I think that those, for us, that's the real challenge.
How do you see that being resolved? Like that, is it kind of like, that doesn't seem like something that, passively improves on its own and gets better over time? Like, is it kind of a regulatory lever? Is it, startups just have to, or, kind of innovators have to just kind of keep at it, and eventually people will change their minds for no particular reason? Like, what's the kind of phase change?
The phase change is working with the customer, much more so than you potentially do need to with other types of product development. So getting the product in the hands of the customer early and working out what the challenges would be for them to convert to a new product, and then trying to work with them to solve those problems. And that's the number one thing that everyone can do and is trying to do. And then regulatory approvals, again, it's about having those people engaged right from the R&D part right through to the trials as well, and taking everybody along on the journey, but you've got these huge barriers around the fact that it is the most commoditized. It's cheaper than water. It's cheaper to buy concrete than it is to buy water. It's an insanely commoditized industry that has a way of doing things that has also been cost optimized, and still requires on humans pushing concrete around in formwork. So lots of challenges, but working with the customer is going to be critical.
And can I add to that, like that difficulty with like these big like the big industries, like you're talking about, Louise, they have these vast ecosystems that develop over decades and support networks. You know, it's not just the plant itself, it's like your upstream and downstream, everything that goes around it, the skills, the workers, like all of that needs to shift in a little bit. And there's tremendous inertia to preventing that. And in order to get it going, you really need everyone on board. And so whether like governments need to invest in these companies and technologies, you need to get investors on board and finances, as well as like scientists and researchers and the communities and the workers themselves. Like that's why we're talking about, you need to collaborate across the whole ecosystem. It's not enough with just one company, like you just decarbonize and everything will work. It's like, well, their technicians, all the support things, the suppliers that they buy it from and the people they sell it to and how they use it also needs to be on board that journey. So I do very feel for the big industries.
Well, I think probably like one of the things that I started, you know, don't know why I fell in love with decarbonising concrete 22 years ago, but it did, and stuck with it. It's in my heart. Can't do anything about it. And you know, it was more involved from an academic perspective then. And what I really realised over this period of time is often how misaligned our efforts can be, despite everyone having the same intent and purpose and ambition. And you know, I did an analysis of research funding from I think 2000 to 2010, and over 80% of the research funding that was allocated to the construction sector was for technologies that would have less than 5% impact. And again, it's not from a lack of passion or desire or want to make change. It's from just people not aligning. So we need to have academia, industry, and end user all aligned with the same goals. And unfortunately, some of the technologies that will actually drive positive, you know, big change and big gains aren't very sexy. And you know, whereas there are other technologies that, you know, sound fabulous, but at best they're going to have sort of this 5% impact. So, you know, part of what, you know, my role and what I've been doing in forming the centre with UTS is about trying to align, you know, academic and industry funding around the construction industry, and then bringing the customer and the regulators into that mix as well. So I think investment in things like the SmartSat CRC, if you guys have heard of that, and the HILT CRC, those kinds of initiatives that sort of require you to have those things all working together, will really help to drive the change for our sector anyway.
Yeah, Charlie, I saw you wanted to jump in, and then I want to come to Brigid on the kind of role of corporates investing in this space.
Oh yeah, I was just going to jump in and say I think it's important in this context of scaling solutions to realise, for a generation that's kind of grown up with companies like Canva and Afterpay and things that just scale incredibly fast, scaling in the world of atoms, when you're trying to move atoms, it just moves slower, even with really powerful breakthrough technology. So I think it's important that in the conversation, and we talk about technology kind of addressing net zero, we don't assume that we are going to see the same rate of technology we've seen in the internet. We will still see change, but we shouldn't get too disappointed if it doesn't transform the sector overnight. But I'm confident that with momentum, it will over time.
Yeah, cool, absolutely. Yeah, so just to kind of come across to Brigid, I'm really curious, and you know, the Boral example is a good one. Like the kind of historical participation of industry in funding research is kind of one avenue of commercialization, but this kind of big push into corporate venture and, you know, playing a role in investing in emerging technologies in that way is super interesting. So love to hear about BHP Ventures and kind of a little bit of the maybe backstory there, and then what kind of investments you guys have been able to kind of start moving along the commercialization path.
Yeah, so just from a background perspective, BHP Ventures is a relatively new corporate venture capital arm. I think it's been in existence for about 18 months, but in full form for the past 12 months. I joined BHP Ventures last December to help with establishing its corporate VC and helping it understand how to, from a US perspective, and that's where I'm located. Right now I'm in San Francisco, but I'm usually in Seattle, Washington. So from our perspective, I think from a ventures perspective, BHP Ventures perspective, we're looking really and spend a lot of time understanding in each area of climate tech, what are truly the disruptive and emerging technologies, and break down the whole thing from the entire value chain. So as we're talking about hydrogen, there's a lot of elements associated with hydrogen, and there's a lot of venture companies that are addressing each element of that entire value chain. So although there's a lot of technology that's out there, there are areas in those value chains where there needs to be step changes in order from a cost perspective, an efficiency perspective, a storage perspective, transportation perspective, all these things. There are all these sort of tension points and friction points in the entire value chain. So understanding what that is and seeing that's where the role of a corporate comes in, where we can help de-risk aspects of that entire value chain. So that is what our role is at BHP Ventures. We're looking at a lot of things in terms of how we can help with decarbonization efforts across all of our assets, and also some of our efforts associated with Scope 3, in particular in terms of steelmaking. We've done a couple of transactions in green steel, and I think that is a good example of where corporates can actually show value. So one of our transactions is Boston Metal, which is a company based outside of Boston, Massachusetts, that's developing a technique for green steel. So what is our role in that transaction? There's a number of things. One is helping the company understand the customers on the back end. These corporates, like ourselves, we know what our customers need and want and how it works in the entire supply chain. So a lot of the things that we do with those companies is teaching them about the market, teaching them about understanding, because we need these companies to scale. And that's the expertise and access that most companies do not have access to. A big corporate like ourselves can do that, and the right investor can help you do that if they have the connections with their customers. So we spend a lot of time with our companies teaching them about the market, but also about what it takes to scale a large company. So at BHP, that's something that we're very good at. So how everything from the roads that you establish for those plants to the regulatory market to actually how you actually get that material out of your plant. These are things that sometimes startups don't think about because they're thinking about the sort of problem they're solving, not how they sit in the entire ecosystem. And so we spend a lot of time with our companies explaining to them the entire value chain and how they sit in the ecosystem. And lastly, some cases we provide them material. So if we're trying to figure out how to help with decarbonization efforts with steelmaking, someone needs to give them iron ore, and that's what we do. And we help them understand what that means. So it is not an easy process. It's teaching them about characterization, quality, how that's going to affect their process. What are impurities? How do you actually quantify those impurities? And so all of these things are these institutional knowledge that you have at a corporate, including then enormous market insights that we have. And we help share that because in order for this to work, we need to be able to lend our expertise to these companies to teach them how to scale. So that is our role. Some of that role may be our sort of expertise. It's going to be our ability to help companies understand project financing, how to do decision evaluation, how to bring things to market, but also how to actually navigate a regulatory market. That's something that something like us we can do, and we have a lot of experience doing that. So all that to say, that's the role that we serve and helping the companies, because ultimately we need to also help them raise money. So that's where the corporate venture capital comes in. I spend a lot of my time helping these companies fundraise to be viable. So Louise mentioned viability. It's not just about the viability at our sites, it's the viability of the company. And so we have to help other investors understand the value of that company, help them raise future rounds, and create a company that's sustainable and scalable. And so that's why I'm here in San Francisco right now, talking to other investors to help raise funds for our companies, because we can't do it alone.
Yeah.
So that would be our role, and that's sort of BHP Ventures.
Awesome. That's a great bit. I definitely want to come back to the kind of raising capital and what it looks like for deep tech companies versus other companies. It's something that I have been thinking about a lot in the kind of last couple of months with Main Sequence Ventures. I see we have a celebrity with us, Sophia Hamblin Wang. Welcome to the call.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm late.
So fine. How was your exciting interview?
Today is a very high news day for climate announcements. And I don't know about anyone else, but I was woken up at 6:30 with like Matt Keane and Barnaby Joyce are tackling it out as to what the opportunities are for New South Wales and for Australia with really ambitious interim targets, which is what we all want. We want 2030 targets for the world. So Yes.
It's a good day. So I got everyone to do a quick intro when they join the call. So welcome to the call. Do you want to give kind of everyone, we have 7 panelists, which is wild. Do you want to give just a couple sentences on what MCI does and which kind of part of decarbonising heavy industry you guys are in, and maybe the kind of fun fact of how much of the global emissions your sector contributes to? And then we'll come back to the McKenzie stuff.
Yep, great, no problem. Sophia, Hamblin, Wang, just acknowledge I'm on Ngunnawal land and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. I am the COO of a carbon tech platform that transforms CO2 into building materials and other valuable industrial products. We use an Earth's natural process and we speed it up from millions of years into a matter of minutes in our pilot plant. And we focus on creating cements and plasterboards and other solid products, which I usually carry around with me so people can see what climate action can look like. And if you turn a waste gas into a valuable material, what kinds of things, what kind of innovation light bulbs turn on for people. I have been working in the space for 8 years now, and we have received a fair amount of government support from both sides of both governments, Labor and Liberal. So that's a really strong and solid sign. And most recently, we've received a $14.6 million grant from Angus Taylor and from the federal government to build a demonstration plant in New South Wales on Kooragang Island. That's taking CO2 from an ammonium nitrate factory and converting it into building materials. Now we can, sorry, I'm being very fast, but I don't need to talk too much.
Great.
So the scalability of mineral carbonation technologies generally is significant. In fact, if you consider that you can bind CO2 to minerals and the kinds of minerals that we look at, there's actually more of that kind of feedstock or mineral in the world than fossil fuels. So the limit to the scalability of our technology and our kind of technology isn't the availability of feedstock. It's more about business models, adoption, techno-economics around location and distance and all that kind of thing. But we're developing the technology with in the acknowledgement that we need to make money in the medium term and the short term, and in the long term will be a negative emissions technology that can pair with direct air capture and create, and at the very worst, just store CO2 into minerals and put it straight back in the ground. And that's one of the ways that we can be meeting our Paris goals.
Awesome. The questions, there's a couple of, I really love that we've got a good representation of startups and people kind of building the technology on the call. I'd be curious to hear you guys kind of reflect on kind of experience raising capital. So, definitely it's exciting that there's the amount of grant funding available that there is, but when you kind of look at the grand scheme of how much money has to be spent to build the things that are required to really scale the technology, it just, the grant money just pales in comparison to what's really required. So what's your experiences been like kind of putting together the capital pathways for the companies? What's the appetite like from traditional venture capital investors, as well as kind of who were the kind of new players on the scene in terms of financing? Maybe I'll start with Charlie and then kind of push out to Soph and to Tim.
Yeah, sure. Well, certainly we raised a seed round earlier this year from some angel investors, and we had quite a lot of conversations with venture capitalists. So there's no doubt that the venture capital scene in Australia is light years ahead of where it was, even 5 years ago, maybe 10 years ago. Is that enough to get us to where we need to get to? Probably not. The reality is that we're going to need all forms of financing, so the sort of corporate venture capital as a type that Brigid was talking about, but also venture capital. We still need more, and I think we need to see the grant funding as really a complement and a stimulus for that. So I think sometimes the government thinks that if they put too much grant funding, it'll displace investment funding or whatever, but I think actually they can grow together. So a lot of room for growth on both sides. I think, as I say, it's better than it was, but it still could be a lot more. And the other thing I just say is that deal-making timelines in Australia are still too long. Investors need to move fast.
Feedback for investors on the call. Yeah. Soph?
So our pathway has been as I said, we've received 3 really significant government grants in order to fund our development and de-risk the scale up of our technology, and that has been really fantastic. But we know that now there is an explosion in ESG financing in the world and in Australia. So for us, it's more about validating our technology, our life cycle assessments, and ensuring that we're competitive with other international companies on when it comes to investment decisions. We found it really difficult to the world is very US. The majority of the finance in the world is very US centric. And so we've found it a little bit difficult to be seen to be on a level playing field if we're just based in Australia. But I think that that's something that is changing, and we've been building our business model with the confidence that that funding will come. But then the other thing is that we've been working with some of the largest companies in the world on creating projects for their emissions, and so lots of venture arms of large companies, as well as strategic investments from companies that will be needing to decarbonize and have new funding unlocked. That's been we couldn't have prepared for that 8 years ago necessarily, but that is probably smart strategic investment is where it's at for us.
Awesome. Kim?
Yeah, so I'm working with a lot of companies right now. So I think the timing right now is fantastic. I feel like the investors are starting to understand what deep tech investing actually is. And they're also starting to lead companies, instead of, just go out and get a customer, they're saying, okay, you need partners. You need to talk to people like Brigid. I think Brigid's comments on, big companies understanding an entire value chain and having a vision for how they could change that value chain, that's critical to create a ladder for startups and scale-ups to be able to increase their value. And I think also that's a whole skill set that, there's a generation of folks who have just not been exposed to that. In Australia, we have not seen that kind of, value chains being rethought and re-engineered. And so all of the different components, the startup entrepreneurs, the deep tech savvy investors like you guys, Cass, and corporates like Brigid, they need to be on the same page so that the work that Charlie and Sophia are doing actually can scale. And I disagree. I know Rachel wants us to do some disagreement. Charlie, I disagree slightly on what you're saying about atoms are harder than bits. I want to point you to someone who's doing stuff in the space industry. So Elon Musk currently has managed to build 10 flight-ready vehicles, the largest vehicles of their kind in history, in 18 months out in the open using oil and gas and construction people, right? And he's flown 5 of them, crashed 4. It's the most extraordinary innovation in the space sector. If they screw up, they're going to reduce the cost of access to space by 25x, right? So I think if we get all of those different components aligned and everyone on the same page, actually, I think we can scale up those atoms pretty fast as well. And I'm kind of ambitious for Australia to take a leadership position globally in this. So Cass, that's kind of my kind of bullish investor, mentor kind of mindset right now.
Yeah, it's funny actually, the kind of comment on like atoms is easier than bits. I think like the joke I tell about deep tech is, how startups take a long time and they're really risky. What if they took longer and they were more risky? Because it's crazy, right? It's like, I grew up in software investing, and it's like, you want to meet a startup, and you meet a startup, and if you have a logo for your fund, you probably don't invest in startups before they have revenue, right? Like we just don't do that. And so you come into the world of deep tech, and it's like things that are, I would say that the large majority of VC firms in Australia still don't know what TRL is short for, which is the thing that I find constantly just, as like a very simple proxy for what it is to be thinking about investing in deep tech, right? You're like, oh, like people like, what TRL 3 or 4? And they're like, I don't know what TRL is. You're like, cool. Like this kind of mindset switch to get ready to invest in things that are 3, 5, 7 years away from knowing if the science is going to work let alone kind of deploying to scale where you can think about capturing billions of dollars of revenue. I think, you know, I would say we're pretty fresh in Australia to having the kind of whole VC ecosystem ready to think about backing those things. And I think the kind of flip side of that is it's not super clear. Like, we don't have success stories that are kind of being told widely about it. And I think people understanding what, like, how that kind of, like, how do you make investments in that space when a venture capital fund is a 10 or 12 year thing, right? It's just really challenging, I think, to meld those groups. Obviously, Main Sequence is playing in this space, and they have a kind of a nuanced view around including corporates in the picture, and having that as a way to accelerate timelines. But I definitely think in Australia that broadly speaking, like, VC is not nearly as, there's just not the kind of capital market that there is in the US.
No, I mean, I would say in the United States right now, the funds that have been raised in the past 2 months are spectacular. I mean, there's more money that's been raised in the United States in the past month than there has been in the past 5 years. And where you have funds like Lower Carbon, who raised around $800 million in just a matter of weeks, that really creates a very competitive market. So, and then you have the mega funds like TPG Rise and Brookfield and others that are also helping for project financing. So the deals are moving fast. I mean, I can tell you that I'm here because there's a deal moving in 2 weeks. So, like, that is how fast the market is moving. And the raises are enormous. So you have Lilac, who just raised like $150 million. You have Redwood Materials, $750 million. These are early stage startups that are amassing massive capital. And so that's going to allow people to scale. But just to the point what you said before is often in venture capital, people say, oh, no, we don't want the corporate VCs. We're not ready. We need them for a Series B. We need them for a Series D. In this case, it's too late, in my opinion, because you need that expertise around the table that's going to allow you to scale, because this sort of ecosystem requires scale. It doesn't require putting bits on a SaaS container and deploying it to AWS, because let me tell you, that's cheap compared to creating a long duration energy storage in the middle of the Pilbara. So that is two very, very different capital intensive companies. So a lot to say is I would encourage everybody, the landscape is changing. People are looking for deals because deals are too competitive here. So I would encourage you to try to follow people like Lower Carbon Capital, Chris Saka's team, Clay Dumas and Clea and others. I'd encourage you to look at things like Blue Bear Capital, who just raised $150 million, more of a boutique fund, who has an understanding of the mining sector and heavy industries. There's Congruent Ventures too as well. They won't do really Australian deals, but you can make them interested, right? And tell them about why there's value. And if you go down to lower TRL levels, Breakthrough Energy Ventures has an arm called Breakthrough Energy Fellows. And they're giving fellowships to $2 to $3 million for groundbreaking ideas. And I'm happy to send along the link to anybody that's interested. They'll be actually doing applications for their next cohort. There was nobody in Australia this time around. So I love to see people in Australia, especially from the academic community, get that $2 to $3 million to help scale a company in Australia and bring the technology to Australia. So if you can help me and help Breakthrough Energy Fellows with sort of helping with the research commercialization efforts that they're doing, I think that would be great for Australia too as well.
Amen. We're coming up to the end of our time, and definitely I want to make an opportunity for people in the audience to put questions in the chat and kind of to talk to our esteemed group of panelists. I think I'm probably biased a bit as an investor by background to love a little bit of shop chat. So I'd be curious. One of the things that I'm hearing a lot of, and curious to hear the views of you, Brigid, and kind of others on the panel who are engaging with this. There's a bit of a bubble sensation, I would say, at the moment in climate tech, around so much money being raised in the last few months and valuations being at an all-time high across every type of startup. But in climate tech, probably a disproportionate mismatch between the amount of capital available and the number of companies that are ready and scaling. Kind of curious, that there's, it's super exciting that there's so much money being raised, but what we definitely don't want is clean tech 2.0, right? Like, we don't want all the money to get burnt again, and for all the founders who were in it the first time to refuse to come back. Curious, like, what's the kind of sentiment on the ground in the US around that kind of fear?
Well, I think the fear is real. So, I mean, at least for me, I'm much more conservative and pragmatic when it comes to valuations for companies, and seeing a company with a pre-money valuation of like $100 million and no revenue and being a Series A makes me uncomfortable, quite frankly. So like, I think the market is very frothy, and people are making valuations on term sheets that aren't reasonable, in my opinion. And everybody believes that same thing. So I think we need the capital. I don't think it's the best thing for founders. It creates unreasonable expectations on the founders as well, which makes it very difficult for them to scale their companies. That's a lot of pressure as well. So all that to say is, you know, I can't predict the future, but it is very competitive, and I think some of the valuations are outsized.
Yeah, definitely. It's a great time, but you know, I think, you know, on the founder side of the table, you know, you hear that, you're like, cool, getting on a flight, see you later. But definitely the kind of risk in the medium term is that, you know, if it all blows up again and we're kind of you know, you go through like kind of ice ages, right? And we definitely can't afford an ice age on climate tech. So that would be not a good outcome. Cool. I would love to hear if there are any, we didn't kind of touch too much on policy and regulatory stuff. Obviously I have a bent towards kind of how can individual actors and kind of companies play a big role. But you know, the kind of story around it's about partnerships and people building together is so crucial for this, because it's infrastructure and it's slow timelines and it's regulatory permissiveness, right? Maybe if there's any questions to check in the chat. Mon, you had a question, which was whether there are any other countries apart from the US that are doing this well. Were you talking about funding of climate tech, or were you talking about something else? Deep tech investments. I can't comment on that.
Perhaps I can add something in here that partially answers the question, which is that the EU has committed to Fit by 55, which is a 55% reduction in their emissions by 2030, which is a really comprehensive policy, which has like 12 aspects to it, and you would all be aware of many of its features, but one of them is the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is going to impose costs on trading partners that have high carbon intensity products, which is, you know, talking about the cost side. But yesterday I was listening to McKenzie's analysis of what this may mean for global markets, and one of the two of the key points that came out of that were their analysis said that in order to meet that 55% reduction, it's going to take 8.4 trillion euros of investment. Okay. And they broke it down in terms of which industries that's going to be, but that's mobilizing a significant amount of global finance and government funding and all kinds of things. Like, this is just a significant opportunity for many different companies and countries. And yeah, the other thing is that if you consider Australian aluminium or Australian steel, and the fact that right now we don't have ambitious enough climate policies, that we would have the tariffs imposed upon us, and that would make our imports our exports less competitive. But if we did have very good targets and we did create low carbon aluminium and steel, that actually makes us way more competitive in the market. And so people aren't really getting to the opportunities yet. They're not really thinking about, like, especially if you consider Russia and China and those other the high carbon intensity markets that aren't going to be able to match the kinds of things that we can do. Wow, that really opens up opportunities.
I think that's an excellent point, Sophia, and sort of picking up on the carbon border adjustment mechanism. I think for so long in Australia, the narrative has been that taking strong action on climate change means loss of jobs, and it means higher cost of living and being less competitive. And I think it's really interesting that the global policy shifts means that there's a potential for a real shift in the narrative across Australia around this, that actually this is about opportunity. This is about retaining jobs and creating new jobs. It's about making sure that we do we take this defensive stand around our GDP and make sure that we're strong into the future. There's incredible potential.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I was just going to. I couldn't agree with you guys more. I guess like it's a little plug. Like we had released a report just today, but talking exactly about what you're saying, like the export powerhouse. Like this transition to decarbonize is actually a massive opportunity for Australia, given our resources, both mineral and renewable, and our skills in terms of scaling up these big export industries. Like we've done it in the past with the LNG and iron ore. Like our skill and ability to rapidly scale is unparalleled around the world. Plus our great infrastructure with ports and trading partners. It's just like everything is all there. All the ingredients are there. We just need to set, like, we want to make this happen. That's really what we're sort of saying. Like, we just need federal, state, like community ambition for it. And that's why, like, I guess the news from New South Wales today with the 50% emissions reduction is so great, because that's like one step there. Hopefully the, more jurisdictions will get on board, but you guys are absolutely correct. It's like a massive opportunity in terms of like, it's not like we lose all these exports and lose all these jobs when we transition away from fossil fuels. It's actually, we can get more. It's not even matching it, it's more. We can grow like all these minerals with lithium, nickel, copper, all our renewables with hydrogen and ammonia opportunities, even green steel and aluminium, producing that with our renewables. Anyway, I'm very excited about it. And it is kind of like, pie in the sky, like, is this actually going to happen? And it's going to be difficult. It's not a given. Like, for sure, you need the right investments, you need the right policy levers, you need the right people involved, and you need the ambition. But, if we can set that all together, we're one of the best countries placed in the world to make it happen. So if we fail, it would be because we didn't go for it, not because we couldn't. So
so I'd like to kind of build on a point that Chun's made. I think there's a lot of exciting opportunity. I think there's a barrier a bunch of barriers that we've got to deal with, which are very, very simple but fundamental. And that is, how do people do deals with each other? How do we get that IP that's locked up in universities? So you asked about, what are the policy mechanisms? So I know that one of the federal minister, Alan Tudge, has given universities 4 weeks to respond to a proposal for standard university commercialization contracts. I'll drop a link to that in the chat. And so that's an example where, the same way that kind of Y Combinator safes have completely revolutionized angel investing and, reduced the amount of time it takes to do an angel round, I think we need a lot more kind of standardized partnerships or ways that we can manage the commercial give-get between parties in these relationships, so people get more confident about doing partnerships. Wow, I'm going to do a deal with BHP and I'm not terrified that BHP is going to eat me alive. And conversely, if I'm BHP like Brigid and I'm going to invest in a small company, they're not going to freak out and go and buy a Ferrari, right? So that kind of way that we have to get all of the ducks lined up, that's the work that I think we now need to do. And it's definitely different for deep tech, and partnerships are the proxy for that sort of customer validation. How do you do partnerships? Honestly, all of us, I think we all have to learn that, and our business community has to learn that. So that's my contribution to your question. Yeah.
So I would just suggest looking at, so what I think is a great model for Australia to adopt is one that I came across from Toronto. So there's a famous economist out of the University of Toronto that talks about how you actually commercialize research from universities, and also how do you create and spur innovation within corporates, and where that sort of synergy is between the two organizations. So there's an organization called the Creative Destruction Lab, and then CDL, and they do these cohorts around the world, and they're based off the principle of this economist, and one of which is a climate one out of Paris and Oxford. So I would just encourage, I think it's a really great model to create the right mentorship, the corporates. If you look at the mentors and all of it, that's pretty spectacular. And those mentors also help with angel investing and venture capital investing too as well. So that helps spur those sort of principles of how to do commercialization out of universities, and also how to create corporate empathy related to meaningful engagement with startups. It's something that you may want to look at in terms of those models.
I just want to add something on, obviously just related to the construction industry, two points around, regulators and so on. So one of the products that I created back in 2007 is a product called Invisia, a much lower carbon concrete than anything on the market. To this day, that concrete is still not approved by one regulator. I've had 2 ARC linkage grants to the University of New South Wales to prove everything from the microstructure and porosity, pore concentration, lifespan, durability of this concrete to the nth degree. Invested millions of dollars in that, and still don't have approval. What's that, 14, 15 years from when that product was first delivered to market. So these are the kinds of challenges when people say, you know, why is that industry moving so slowly? I can assure you that the legs are going 19 to the dozen underwater, but until we can get that alignment right across, you know, if a regulator won't approve the concrete, it can't go into a building, end of story. And there is no clear pathway for how to get approval. You know, you go, you engage, you get the goalposts, you come back and you met them, and the goalposts get moved. So that's a really, you know, a critical thing. The second thing, again, for a commoditized industry like construction, you know, the 2 big levers that this industry can pull are lower carbon cements and carbon capture and storage. So while we wait for storage infrastructure to be, you know, to be a reality,
Utilization.
You know, well, but that's the thing. So utilization, and one of the things in the utilization space, you know, is a lot of people wanting to generate IP, and you know, and expecting, you know, ... profit. And one of the things that I've really noticed as I track the trends, that the technologies that are open source, such as LC3, if anyone's heard of that technology, you know, the information's out there. You know, the adoption curve is moving at pace. And for other technologies where the IP has been locked down to the nth degree, you know, extensive capital and licensing agreements before we can even pilot and so on, those technologies are moving really slowly. So in a commoditized industry where we're looking at 2 cents makes a difference, you know, sort of that more freedom around IP is going to be critical.
Awesome. I was going to we're kind of running up on time, so I wanted to do a last round of comments from everyone, but everyone kind of did the last round of comments, which is great for me. So did you have something you were waiting to share?
That was great, Louise. I am such a supporter of the work you're doing, and I think that one thing to add about that is that the leading companies in the world will commit to net zero and create profit and get all of those market leading advantages. But it's the role of the government to set legislative minimum standards so that companies feel so that companies can act and know that they won't be at a disadvantage. And that's what we really need to be. Even though we work on technologies and we're making incremental changes, we also do have an advocacy responsibility to help policymakers know what they should be doing.
Awesome. Cool. I might throw back over to Rachel Slattery.
Oh, thanks
Thank you so much to our panelists.
Yeah, thank you all so much. We've only really just got started. We could keep going. This is so interesting. I could listen all day. I want to thank you all. We've got more circles coming up. I think we might have to revisit this